The Miami Dolphins should flat out be ashamed of themselves, not because their quarterback got hurt, but because they didn't have a plan in case it happened. We'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the new Locked On NFL, bringing you a double dose of NFL's biggest stories with the help of our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. On today's episode of Locked On NFL, we'll talk about the Saints and the Falcons, how they continue a bitter rivalry and where those teams are right now with some injuries on the offensive line. We'll hit that in segment 3. Segment number 2 of the Jets playing with fire again when it comes to Aaron Rodgers. That'll be self-explanatory after we talk about segment 1, which is Miami commit malpractice. And if they need to learn how to do the quarterback position when your quarterback gets hurt, just look at Green Bay. We'll figure that out in just a second and talk about all of those things today. We appreciate you making us your first listen of the day and for being an everyday here on Locked On NFL, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to tune in again to Locked On NFL tomorrow morning for the Madman Tyler Rowland for more NFL coverage. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. That's right. Game Time is the sponsor for today's episode. And all you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, it is Wednesday, and that means David Harrison of Locked On NFL and Locked On Commanders joins us here on the show today. And David, we're going to talk about quarterback malpractice. First of all, before we even start playing a clip, the tale of two different teams in the way that they handled these things. Miami seemingly has a quarterback that has been injured in the past, and everyone knew it was pretty much one bad hit or misfortune. It was very misfortunate, by the way, from being in a bad situation. But it appears that they did nothing to brace themselves for it. Did you find that surprising in the offseason, and did this all of a sudden come and catch you by surprise, or is it pretty much what you thought it was?
I mean, you have to be surprised, right? Because you just look at the history and you have to be able to anticipate these kinds of things. And this is what I talk to fans about every offseason, especially when you cover a team like the Washington Commanders, who are kind of in this constant kind of mode of building and rebuilding, is these front office personnel and these decision makers, they've got to make decisions based on what they know, not what they hope. So if you look at Tua Tagovailoa, and I will admit that I've never been quite as high on a guy like Tua as some people have. But when you look at Tua and you look at what he's gone through, you have to understand that you have a quarterback now. Like what's the saying? I'm not a doctor, right? But what's the saying? Like, once you suffer a concussion, the likelihood that you're going to suffer another one, or the potential for you to suffer another one in a similar situation, it only increases. So you have to understand that you have a quarterback that at any moment, because of the way he plays, how competitive he is, and his medical history, you might have to go without him, hopefully only for a little while. But even for a little while, remember, the Cincinnati Bengals, they lost Joe Burrow, but they still had a winning record last year despite losing Joe Burrow, and they missed the playoffs. The AFC is a conference where you can't really afford to drop 2, 3, 4 games while you're waiting for your quarterback. And yeah, sometimes people luck into the Tom Brady behind them, because let's be honest, like, the Patriots lost Drew Bledsoe. They're like, six round guy, 6th-round quarterback. Why not go out there? And they just kind of lucked into the greatest quarterback of all time. But you have to have a plan when it's not like Drew Bledsoe was coming into that season this like banged up. Everybody's like, oh, we're just waiting on Drew to get hurt again. You've got to have a plan, and you've got to have a succession plan, because when you have a team like this, you're paying Tyreek Hill all this money. Jalen Waddle is still a young receiver who's on the verge of needing more money. Like, you have to come out here and be prepared. You can't just tell guys like Tyreek, like, sorry, bro, we just don't have an answer to get you the ball. Thanks for coming. Like, you got to have a plan here, because you have a team that you're trying to build into a championship contender.
That lack of a plan, I learned a new word listening to Kyle Krabs. It's called hubris. Listen to what Kyle Krabs says, and when we come back, y'all might know what it means. I didn't know what it means until I looked it up. Listen to what Kyle Krabs says is the reason why this is malpractice.
The Miami Dolphins fell in Seattle to the Seahawks by a final score of 24-3. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. Actually, I'm I'm actually pretty mad. I am usually a very process-oriented frame of mind, not overreactionary to things that happen in the moment or the heat of emotions. But my eyeballs work. And I know what product the Dolphins put on the field in Seattle with 10 days of rest and preparation to play a football game. And the only word that I could really think of to describe a 21-point loss in which the defense played admirably well. They held Seattle under 300 yards of total offense. That side of the ball played about as well as you could relative to a great game script in which you were behind 14 points within the first 10 minutes. And I really, again, respect the way that defense played. The word that came to mind was hubris.
David Harrison, I looked up hubris because in the barbershop, we don't use such words. We just call it BS or whatever. All right. Yeah. So I looked it up. It says excessive pride or self-confidence. And it was absolutely perfect. This is arrogance. This is, I can do what I do regardless of who the quarterback is. And it's obviously Coach McDaniel, no, you cannot. And whatever heat that has to come from him to him or the GM Greer, they need it because this team is built to win. You can't just, you lose Tua and you just roll some dude out there, Skylar Thompson, who doesn't look like he knows what he's doing.
Right. No, it absolutely is. And, I know we're talking about Miami, but I'll go up to Detroit. Kid Rock once called this cocky. And what he said about being cocky is not cocky if you're backing it up. Well, the Miami Dolphins aren't backing it up. And honestly, they haven't been backing up because remember, this is a team, even with Tyreek, even with Jalen Waddle, even with Tua Tagovailoa, haven't beaten a team that had a winning record or finished in the playoffs. And I can't even tell you how long it's been so long. Kyle Crabb's a Locked On Dolphins, I'm sure, has that tally going. And this is just another example of a team that has a lot of shiny weapons on the surface, right? But it kind of reminds me of like this great piece of chocolate that's wrapped in this like gold foil. You just think, oh man, like this thing's going to be just delicious. And you unwrap it, it's just a Hershey Kiss. And no offense to Hershey, no offense to people who just love Hershey Kisses, but you can put a gold wrapper on anything. It don't make it any more fancy than it is. And this Miami Dolphins team has not learned from its mistakes in the past. And because it hasn't learned from its mistakes in the past, it's doomed to repeat, the results of history. And I'll give this, like they got a division rival with the Buffalo Bills. And Wig, like I'm not super high on what the Buffalo Bills have done. I kind of look at them. I'm like, I don't really know what direction you're trying to go into. I'm sure you have a plan. I just can't really sense it from an outside perspective. But here's the thing, at least they're doing something, right? Yep. I learned this thing in the military. We're both veterans here. The worst decision you can ever make is no decision. If anytime you look at a situation, you say, you know what the best thing to do right now? Nothing. That is always going to fail. The Miami Dolphins looked at their failures of the past and said, you know what, guys? Here's what we're going to do. Nothing. We're just going to come in next year and we're going to do the same stinking thing. And guess what? The same stinking thing is happening to the Miami Dolphins again.
Now, at the top of segment 2, I'm going to show you a team that I hope learned from the same mistake the Dolphins seemingly made this year. I don't know if they have, but before we leave this segment, I'm going to actually sit you. There's nothing better than a side-by-side example. And we also have another term in the military called contingency action, right? And folks say you shouldn't hedge your bets. Well, contingency action is exactly that. You're hedging your bets because the stakes are so high. Listen to what Peter Bukowski says about the Green Bay Packers and their approach after having a quarterback in camp for a week, and now he's 2-0, and they're going to get the other quarterback back.
When we talked about adapting this offense last week to a potentially encumbered Jordan Love, what we mentioned was the offense is not going to actually have to change that much. And what I meant was, depending on the quarterback, you're going to have to ask it to do the same things functionally, structurally, because they're not going to be able to run it down Tennessee's throat right up the middle as effectively as you did against the Indianapolis Colts. And you're going to have to get to more shotgun play action. And so even if you're going to live out of the shotgun, you're going to have to expand the menu, and you're going to have to expand the menu of passes you're willing to throw from the gun, which you can do if you have Jordan Love, and you have to do if you're going to play Malik Willis. And you see on 3rd and 14, he rips the inbreaker to Romeo Doubs. He rips the deep over to Christian Watson on 3rd and 18. Those are plays Jordan Love would have made. Now, I don't know. And so they did a lot of the things. I was surprised how much they let Malik Willis just go play quarterback.
You see, that's exactly what we're talking about. Somebody with a plan. That's a real organization with a plan they have beaten teams. They have beaten playoff teams. They have beaten those teams that we talked about. McDaniel better watch himself, man, being this hot shot play caller, because what it's going to come down to is, yeah, you can win when everything's all perfect, but nothing's never perfect in the National Football League, as we'll talk about in segment 2 in just a second with the Jets. But I'll let you comment on what Peter Bukowski just said.
No, I think he makes a very valid point. And honestly, it comes back to, as well, going back to hubris, right? Like, you don't need a whole lot of time to know who people are. Like, I've kind of learned this over the years of like covering, NFL drafts and players and seeing teams take guys that you kind of have these question marks about. And guess what? The question marks you have about a guy coming out of, I don't know, say Duke, quarterback coming out of Duke who had ball security issues, inaccuracy issues, and wanted to run the ball too much to take too many hits. The New York Giants find out the hard way that guy still is there. He's older, he's smarter, but that guy that he was at Duke is still the guy that he is today, and they're paying for that, unfortunately. So you don't need as much time as people think you do to know who a guy is. Green Bay Packers apparently just needed a week to know who Malik Willis was, and the Tennessee Titans are there going, man, like, we never knew this dude apparently. So I mean, part of it is obviously on the coaching staff, but yeah, Mike McDaniel, man, you're getting, I love you, bro, but you're getting exposed.
Yep, you're going to get exposed. All right. So segment 2, we're going to continue with the quarterback theme up front. And we're going to go to the team that the late, great Pete Axtell once called the big green fungus in New York. Well, they ain't playing like no big green fungus. The Giants are playing like a big blue fungus. But the Jets' hopes are obviously once again contingent on Aaron Rodgers staying healthy. Have they depended on that too much without a contingency action? There's my phrase again. All right, we'll talk about that here on Locked On NFL in just a second. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by FanDuel. That's right, man. Y'all know about FanDuel. I've been telling y'all about FanDuel for such a long time because I like talking about greatness. And FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you actually made your bets. You don't have to leave and come back. It's all right there on FanDuel. I told you, America's #1 sportsbook is always going to have their stuff together. All right, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Now, this doesn't mean that you got to win. No. All you got to do is place your first ever $5 bet, and $200 in bonus bets is going to show up. All you got to do, man, is go to FanDuel.com and download FanDuel.com, or just go visit FanDuel.com from your PC and make sure you take advantage of the big return. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, segment number 2 here on Locked On NFL. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We absolutely thank you for joining us. We're talking about quarterbacks, and we're talking about teams that don't seem to function when their quarterback goes out. Now, I'm going to just be real here. There's not one team that wants to get to their backup. There's not. There aren't a whole bunch of teams that are equipped to stay exactly who they are with a backup quarterback, especially really, really good teams. But I think really, really good teams owe it to themselves and owe it to their team and to the fan base to at least have someone who is competent, who can get you through for a little while. Last year, the Jets learned the hard way, even though they still played hard on defense. They learned the hard way. Did they figure anything out from a coaching perspective that could help them? Well, John Butchko from Locked On Jets, he has the answer for you.
After a dominant win over the Patriots, is it fair to say Jets coaching is turning the corner? So yeah, the much maligned Jets coaching staff now getting some praise after a great Week 3 win over the New England Patriots. I think it's too early to say that the Jets coaching staff is on track at this point. Now, when people question the Jets coaching staff, I think they're really questioning two elements of it, because there are parts of the Jets coaching staff that I think everybody agrees are excellent. I think really there are two areas when people say the Jets don't have good coaching, really two areas to focus on. One is the offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett. And I don't think I need to go into a lot of depth to explain to you why Nathaniel Hackett gets questioned. The second is Saleh as head coach. Nobody's going to question Saleh's dedication. Nobody's going to question Saleh's influence. Nobody's going to question Saleh's effectiveness on the defensive side of the ball. But being a defensive coordinator is different from being a head coach. I think everybody agrees Saleh's a great defensive coordinator. The success the Jets have had on the defensive side of the ball is testament to that. But being a head coach is more than just about building your own side of the ball.
Yeah, well, you know what? Looking like a good head coach, having a real good quarterback goes a long way. So a drop off from Aaron Rodgers down to Zach Wilson or whoever else they had last year, that's pretty significant, right? I think this is why you need that buffer. You need a professional backup. Mac Jones was out there for everybody to take, and nobody acted like they wanted him. I think there are a bunch of quarterbacks that you can get that could keep your stuff on board for a little while. And too bad that the Jets are going to be judged by the fact that Aaron Rodgers, if he stays healthy, they're going to look like geniuses and they have a chance to make a deep run. But if he doesn't, everybody could get fired, and that's a huge variance to overcome.
Yeah, you know what the Jets are doing? The Jets are following the Bruce Arians method of no risk it, no biscuit. You know what I mean? They're risking it all to try to go get that biscuit. And to a certain extent, there's something that's sort of admirable about it, right? The Los Angeles Rams did it not that long ago. They won a championship out of it. And the expectation was, okay, you got your championship now here for the next 5 years or so. You're probably going to be doo-doo and all that. And they have been able to actually keep that ship afloat, at least being competitive, right? They've been able to be a competitive team in the NFC. So kudos to them for doing that. The Jets are in a similar situation, except they're more like what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did when they brought in Tom Brady. And you're basically handing the keys over to a legendary quarterback. Like let's be honest here. When we're evaluating Robert Saleh as the head coach of the New York Jets, what are we really evaluating? Honestly, we're evaluating him as a defensive coordinator because, and John talked about it a little bit there in his video, because Robert Saleh is not running that offense in any way, shape, or form. Aaron Rodgers is running that offense. Nathaniel Hackett's not running that offense. Aaron Rodgers is running that offense because most NFL minds would tell you when you have a quarterback of the age of Aaron Rodgers, as great as he is, you need to go start trying to find your next quarterback. But when you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who is now a mercenary coming to New York to go kill a championship for you, what you don't do is threaten his status in the tribe. And that's what the New York Jets did. They went out and got Tyrod Taylor, who is a guy who can try to keep you afloat if you need him, but he is not a threat to Aaron Rodgers. He's not going to replace him. Nobody's going to call for him. If A-Rod goes up those 5 interceptions, nobody's going to say, why isn't Tyrod starting next week? But you know who could be? A 3rd-round draft pick, a 2nd-round draft pick. And this hasn't come out yet, and I don't know for certain that it's true. I would be highly surprised to find out that Tom Brady was very unhappy when the Buccaneers selected Kyle Trask at the end of the 2nd round, following bringing him in, instead of going and getting him another tight end or a receiver or a blocker or a defender to take the ball away from the opponent every once in a while. I would be very surprised if I found that Tom Brady was not unhappy about that, but that was the difference there, is the Buccaneers said Tom can have so much control, but we're still going to plan for the future, while the Jets, A-Rod is running the show. In fact, I would probably say A-Rod is the head coach, Robert Saleh is the defensive coordinator, which isn't necessarily fair to Robert, right? But that's the job, you know what I mean? And to a certain extent, at least we're all being led to believe that he signed off on it as well and was willing to accept those circumstances. And if that's the case, then you made your bed, you got to lay in it. But I think that when we look at the New York Jets, we got to understand with what they're doing, it's not whether they learned their lesson or not. It's whether or not Aaron Rodgers learned his lesson. But the thing is, Aaron Rodgers is not worried about the Jets without Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is worried about the Jets with Aaron Rodgers.
You got that right. And this is just a tale of two different things. If Rodgers goes down, even if it's for a week or two, and the likelihood of that happening to a 40-year-old quarterback who's been hurt every year for the last 5 years, it's very high. So now you're going to really, really see whether or not Saleh can do what the Packers did and figure out a way to win in a short window if that happens. Injuries have hit the Chargers, who got off to a really, really hot start. My guesstimation says that Jim Harbaugh is going to figure it out and be able to make that team, because of the way that they play a certain way. We're going to listen to a segment here really, really quick about the extent of their injuries And then when we come back, David, I'll give you a chance to talk about their prospects because they played the Chiefs this week.
Sunday was a disaster for the Chargers, who dropped their game to the Steelers, but the result is far from their biggest concern going forward. This is Daniel Wade here from Locked On Chargers, coming to you after a bloodbath of a 20-10 loss for the Chargers against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Justin Herbert entered this game with a high ankle sprain and was questionable. He looked good early on, but as the protection broke down, he ended up seemingly re-aggravating the injury and had to leave this game. But that wasn't the end of the list. Rashawn Slater, their all-pro tackle, had to leave this game with a pectoral injury, and their 5th overall pick, Joe Alt, their right tackle, ended up getting banged up at the end of the game too. Add that to the Chargers already losing their best pass rusher, Joey Bosa, in this game with a hip injury, and the ramifications for this one game could follow the Chargers for a while, with a game against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 4 before their bye week. But for the full game breakdown, make sure to check out the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
David, it's a tough week for Jim Harbaugh to show how good of a coach he is with the opponent they have coming in.
Yeah, man, look, we talked about this not that long ago. The Los Angeles Chargers opened up the season against Las Vegas Raiders and Carolina Panthers. So I didn't believe any of that 2-0 start crap anyway. They lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers. You want to talk about coaches having plans? Mike Tomlin is a man who knows who he needs on his team to win football games and continuously produce winning records. So while everybody's laughing at him for taking Russell Wilson, everybody's laughing at him for taking on Justin Fields, guess what? That man's laughing at you right now. And Pittsburgh Steelers are winning football games. So the Los Angeles Chargers, I never viewed them as the legit contender the way that everybody else did. I thought they would have an inflated win-loss record because they had the second easiest schedule in the NFL this season. And look, after beating the Raiders, beating the Panthers, the Raiders, by the way, just lost to the Carolina Panthers. I don't care that it was Andy Dalton in there. It's still the Carolina Panthers. They've come up against a team with a winning record, and they lose. And they lose by multiple scores. And that just shows you the state of the Los Angeles Chargers. Those injuries are not going to help. And actually, if those injuries are sustainable with the second weakest schedule in the NFL, it might even be worse than I thought they were.
Yeah, they just might be, man. So it's a big test for them in the AFC West. They still play relatively competitive against the Steelers. I do like where they are, but I think we have to be realistic about it. Two teams that are fighting to show you who they are happen to be like the Hatfields and McCoys. The Saints and the Falcons, they can't stand each other. And those games are always in domes, and those games are always loud and crazy. Speaking of a team that invested in a quarterback, even though, well, they invested in a quarterback, the Falcons have actually looked pretty good this year. We'll discuss that in segment number 2 here on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. Man, if you have ever been like me and have been in situations where therapy was really something that you wanted to think about, well, you need to listen, because BetterHelp is an outstanding option. And it could be for any reason. It could be, I had a death in the family. I was dealing with severe pain management and nobody knew why I was hurting so bad. And having people understand that creates an anxiety when they keep telling you nothing's wrong. And also finding time to spend with your loved ones when it seems like you just don't have as much time. There's a lot of reasons you can use therapy. And I really think if you're considering therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It is always an option that could absolutely work for you. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no reason. Here's what you do. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On NFL, where it's your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. Make sure you tap into the double dose of Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland hits you early in the morning with a double shot of espresso. I'm telling you, it's going to wake you up too. They call him the madman for a reason. And you can slide on over here, but we just relax, chill out, and we pick at everybody. And we always in everybody's business over here at the barbershop. That's 5 days a week, Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm actually impressed with the Atlanta Falcons. And this is not about the total picture, but it is about whether or not they've improved and whether or not they have become competent. They lost a close game, but I want to get Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons. I want to get his reaction from the close loss they had to the Chiefs the other night.
The Falcons come up short on Sunday night. I'm Aaron Freeman with Locked On Falcons. The Falcons lost a close competitive game to the Kansas City Chiefs, 22-17 on Sunday Night Football. The Chiefs' ground game fueled an offense that dominated time of possession, possessing the ball for more than 12 minutes more than the Falcons, and the Falcons just couldn't take advantage of their limited opportunities with 2 final possessions in a position late in the game to make the go-ahead score. They came up short, once on a pair of underthrown balls from Kirk Cousins to Drake London and Kyle Pitts in the end zone, and then on another pair of rushers that got bottled up in short yardage. The Falcons will get another chance to get their first home win of 2024 next week versus their bitter rivals, the New Orleans Saints, in a battle that could help decide NFC South playoff race. For more coverage of the Atlanta Falcons, follow Locked On Falcons, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons, he makes some absolutely wonderful, wonderful points about the Falcons. This is a good game with 2-2-1 teams.
Yeah, the thing about the Atlanta Falcons, right? So they obviously come in, they come in with the record that they have, and people will say you are what your record says you are. And I think it's funny, Wade, because we go through this episode and we start off talking about a team that didn't do enough to get a backup quarterback, and now we're going to end up talking about a team in Atlanta, at least, where we would all say they did too much to go get the backup quarterback or the next quarterback, right? So you got 2 different sides of the coin here. But I think we have to remember about the Atlanta Falcons is, the history of the NFL will tell you that when a quarterback gets a new offensive coordinator, or an offensive coordinator gets a new quarterback, or both are new together, there's a growing period, right? There are growing pains you have to go through. And I think that's important to remember here with the Atlanta Falcons. The other part to remember is that Kirk Cousins is coming off a very serious injury. And yes, he's back, and yes, he's playing, and yes, he's practicing. But anybody who's gone through a torn ligament of pretty much any kind will tell you that it takes time. Like, once you're healed and ready to go back to regular activity, and these are all in air quotes for our audio audience, you're not like 100%. Like, you're not just you again. It's like, okay, I'm healed, and now I'm just the same old guy you saw before. No, it takes time. And so you add that on to learning a new system, the system learning you, coordinator learning you learn a coordinator, all that kind of stuff. Even if you're working with somebody you're familiar with, people change, people grow, people have experiences. The Atlanta Falcons have a lot to build off of right now. I think that's the most important thing. I know we hate moral victories, but guess what? In the early part of the season, those moral victories can turn into actual victories. And this is a very critical stretch for the Atlanta Falcons, because not only do they got the Saints this week, after that, they got the Bucks. After that, they got the Panthers. That's 3 divisional games. If they can take those 3 divisional games, they put themselves in the driver's seat, and then they get to rinse their NFC South taste out of their mouth a little bit. They get the Seahawks, but then they come right back. They got the Buccaneers, then the Cowboys, then the Saints. This is an incredibly important stretch for the Atlanta Falcons to learn from these first 3 games, because they're coming out of that Kansas City Chiefs game. I understand they got dominated time possession, but they're going to come out of that thing and say, look, guys, even though we had few opportunities, bro, we could have won that game. So if you could have won that game, you could beat the Saints, you could beat the Bucks, you could beat the Panthers, you could do all of these things. It's about learning, being patient enough with yourself to learn appropriately, and doing it in the opportune times. And, look, this is going to be a very big stretch for the Atlanta Falcons to find out who they are and see just how far they've come in the first 3 weeks of the season.
And one of the keys, Aaron Freeman said, is the Chiefs basically ran a bunch of plays. They had the ball control. That has become a little bit more difficult with New Orleans. Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints going to tell you why.
Well, that one's going to hurt. I'm Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast. The New Orleans Saints expected to now be without starting center Eric McCoy for 6 to 8 weeks. He's going to have to undergo surgery for the groin injury that knocked him out up against the Philadelphia Eagles on just the 3rd play of the game. All this, of course, due to reporting from NFL Network. So this is a big loss for New Orleans. They had a lot of trouble running the football without Eric McCoy in the lineup. How much of that was because of what Philly was doing well? How much of that was the Saints having to replace Eric McCoy in a game as opposed to with a week of preparation? We don't know. We'll have to see. But in terms of solutions, here's where the New Orleans Saints will likely go. Either Lucas Patrick or Cesar Ruiz, one of their starting guards, will likely shift to center. My vote would be Cesar Ruiz, move him back to his natural collegiate position. And then they can elevate somebody from the practice squad, maybe a Kyle Hergel, to help to build out the rest of the depth on the offensive line. They could also look outside the building, add to the practice squad, and then eventually up to the active roster. A guy like Mason Cole would make a lot of sense.
All right, Dave, we got about a minute. Tell me who you think wins this game. Who wins despite the depleted offensive line from both teams?
I think the Falcons are going to win. I think the Falcons are going to win because I think that the depleted offensive line impacts New Orleans Saints more than it impacts the Atlanta Falcons. I like that Falcons defense, and I'll tell you what, we're going to flip the coin over again. The Saints, their next few matchups, they got the Falcons, they've got the Kansas City Chiefs, they've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Guess what the Chiefs and the Buccaneers have? Two of the best interior defensive linemen in the National Football League. Losing that center is massive for the New Orleans Saints. They could go 0-3 in this next stretch, and all those good vibes that they just had coming into last weekend could be a complete memory. And then you got the Denver Broncos and Wig. The Buccaneers learned the hard way. Sean Payton, he knows the NFC South, and he knows how to beat you.
He does know how to beat you. And kudos to Sean Payton for making me look silly by thinking that Sean Payton was looking silly in Denver. I tell you what, man, we don't look silly here on Locked On NFL because we give it to you in a double dose twice a day. Tyler Rowland, the Madman, in the morning. Tony Wiggins in the barbershop, coming to you in the early afternoon here on Locked On NFL, the new Locked On NFL, adding in the local hosts that cover the team and know the team better than anyone. And we love it here on Locked On NFL. Make sure you tap in tomorrow on Thursday with both episodes wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. All right, Mr. Harrison, we will see you next Wednesday, my brother. Enjoy your time out there covering the Commanders, all on the road like a jet setter. I see you, man. All right, we'll see you next time here on Locked On NFL. Make sure you take care of each other, and we'll do the same.